Imagine reading like a survival manual, right? One written by 68 of the smartest experts in the world.
Okay, yeah. That sounds like a book you definitely want to pay attention to.
Exactly. So you are studying this manual to prepare for literally the most dangerous, high-stakes scenario imaginable.
Right.
And then, as you turn the pages, you realize something pretty terrifying.
Let me guess, the experts don't actually agree on what to do?
Well, it's more that for almost every single life or death rule in the book,
Hmm.
they admit they have very little hard evidence that it actually works.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Today, we are stepping into a medical landscape that is incredibly murky and just uh, overwhelmingly complex.
I mean, it is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Hmm.
Because when a child's body turns on itself, things escalate with terrifying speed.
Right.
And the neat lines of textbook medicine blur incredibly fast in those moments. We are looking at a space where hesitation is fatal, but acting on the wrong impulse can be, just as deadly.
Which brings us to our mission for today. Because today is April 11th, 2026, and we are unpacking a highly specific document for this deep dive.
The new guidelines, right?
Yes, the newly updated, and it's a long title, so bear with me, the Surviving Sepsis Campaign International Guidelines for the Management of Septic Shock and Sepsis-Associated Organ Dysfunction in Children.
It is a mouthful, yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
But we are going to translate these super dense medical protocols into a look at how frontline doctors actually make decisions. Because the updated definition of pediatric sepsis we are working with here isn't just like a really bad infection.
No, not at all.
It is defined as an infection combined with life-threatening organ dysfunction. We're talking about the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system, coagulation, the neurologic system, all of them potentially failing at once. So, okay, let's unpack this.
And for you listening, I really want to emphasize something before we dive into the clinical details here. Even if you aren't a medical professional, even if you've never set foot in an ICU.
Why should they care?
Exactly. Understanding how these expert panels make these specific decisions, it offers an absolute masterclass in risk management. It's about critical thinking, and most importantly, navigating extreme uncertainty when the stakes literally could not be higher.
Uncertainty is definitely the operative word here, because before we look at the specific treatments, we really need to look at the rule book itself.
Yeah, the methodology is wild.
It is. How these rules are created reveals a truly surprising reality about modern medical evidence. Like, these 2026 guidelines, they were assembled by 68 international experts representing 13 different medical organizations, plus, a team of methodologists.
Right, a massive global effort.
Huge. They reviewed all the available global data and produced 61 total statements on how to manage these critical situations.
And if we compare this to the older 2020 guidelines, we basically have 20 brand new recommendations, 13 that were updated for clarity, and 22 that were just carried forward.
Right, because the panel agreed there wasn't any new evidence to prompt a change on those 22. But here is the absolute shocker. I mean, I had to read the source document 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding it.
It's pretty staggering.
Out of those 61 statements crafted by the top minds in the world, only 3 are based on high or moderate quality of evidence. 3.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is that the vast majority of these life-saving protocols are based on low or very low certainty of evidence.
It's crazy.
And for 22 of the questions they evaluated, there was literally insufficient evidence to make any formal recommendation at all. So medicine at this level relies heavily on expert consensus when absolute hard data is just scarce.
Okay, wait, I have to push back on that. You're telling me only 3 out of 61 rules are based on rock-solid evidence. How is that acceptable in modern medicine?
I know how it sounds.
Like, we have supercomputers mapping proteins and gene editing curing diseases, but our pediatric sepsis guidelines are mostly based on low certainty. Feels a bit like building an airplane while flying it.
It absolutely feels that way. But consider the reality of how medical data is normally gathered, right? To get high certainty evidence, you need randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trials.
Right, the gold standard.
Exactly. Now, try to apply that to pediatric critical care. You cannot ethically run a randomized trial on a child dying of septic shock.
Oh.
You can't look at a crashing toddler and say, let's withhold this potentially life-saving treatment from the control group just to see if our statistical model improves.
Wow, yeah, of course. Because the control group would essentially be denied standard care, which could kill them.
Precisely. And beyond just the ethical constraints, the pediatric patient population is wildly diverse. I mean, the biology of a premature infant born at 26 weeks is completely different from the biology of a healthy 16-year-old high school athlete.
But they both fall under the label of pediatric.
Right. So gathering uniform, highly controlled data across that massive spectrum is nearly impossible. But doctors can't just wait for perfect data to be published.
Because a sick child is in bed right now.
Yeah, exactly. They must act decisively despite that profound lack of certainty.
So if the data is that murky, what do the experts actually agree on right out of the gate?
Yeah.
Looking at the guidelines, the answer seems to be speed and precision in the very first moments, the golden hours.
Oh, speed is the ultimate variable in sepsis. The guidelines actually issue a strong recommendation, even with very low evidence certainty, to measure blood lactate as part of the initial evaluation.
Okay, lactate. I hear that mentioned a lot in sports, right? Like lactic acid building up in your muscles after a heavy workout. Why is that a red flag for a systemic infection?
Good question. So lactate is essentially a marker of cellular starvation. Normal human cells use oxygen to create energy.
Okay.
But when a child goes into shock, their circulatory system starts failing, and oxygen stops reaching the tissues. Those starving cells are forced to switch to an emergency backup generator, which is anaerobic metabolism.
And that backup generator produces lactate.
Exactly, as a byproduct.
Right.
So high lactate levels in the blood tell doctors that the crisis has already reached the cellular level. It gives them a baseline to see just how deep the damage goes.
And once they see that damage, the clock really starts ticking. Because the guidelines state that for a child with suspected septic shock, you need to start antimicrobial therapy as soon as possible.
Ideally within 1 hour.
Right, exactly 1 hour of recognizing the sepsis.
But notice the clinical nuance there, right? That 1 hour rule is specifically for shock. If a child has probable sepsis but hasn't progressed to shock yet, doctors actually have a slightly different window.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they suggest a time-limited course of rapid investigation first. But even then, if the suspicion of sepsis holds up, those medications should ideally start within 3 hours.
Okay, but before a single drop of antibiotics goes into the patient's vein, there is a crucial strategic move. The guidelines insist on obtaining blood cultures before initiating the antimicrobial therapy.
Assuming drawing that blood doesn't cause a substantial delay, yes.
Right. So let me see if I'm tracking the logic here. If you give the antibiotics first, they start killing the bacteria in the bloodstream. By the time you draw the blood to test it, the sample might come back completely blank.
You've got it.
And you've basically destroyed the evidence of what you're actually fighting.
You've just described the classic critical care catch-22. You desperately need to kill the bug, but you also desperately need to identify the bug.
It's like trying to stop a leak in a dark room, or like knowing there's a predator hiding in that room. You throw a giant net first, right?
Yeah.
With broad-spectrum antibiotics, just hoping to blindly catch whatever's in there.
That's a great way to put it.
But then once those blood cultures incubate, they essentially turn the lights on. They identify the exact predator. And once you know what it is, you swap that heavy, clumsy net for a highly precise, smaller net.
That analogy perfectly captures the concept of antimicrobial stewardship. The guidelines explicitly recommend narrowing the empiric coverage the moment the specific pathogen and its vulnerabilities are known.
Makes sense.
And if no pathogen is identified, doctors are advised to stop or narrow the drugs based purely on clinical improvement.
The guidelines also bring up a specific blood test called procalcitonin in this context. Can you break down what that is?
Sure, procalcitonin is a specific protein produced by the body. In a normal, healthy state, the levels are extremely low.
Okay.
But when the body detects a severe bacterial infection, procalcitonin levels spike dramatically. So for years, some hospitals used dropping procalcitonin levels as a green light to say, okay, we can stop the antibiotics now.
But the 2026 guidelines specifically suggest against using procalcitonin routinely to guide when to de-escalate therapy. Why abandon a test that tracks bacterial infection?
Because treating a blood test instead of treating the actual patient can be dangerous. The panel concluded that if a hospital already has effective antimicrobial stewardship programs, meaning infectious disease experts actively managing the drug regimens based on clinical signs, then relying on a single protein marker doesn't add much value.
And it might even mislead the team. Now, treating the root cause goes beyond just giving drugs. The guidelines emphasize this concept of source control. Like, if a child has an intravascular access device, say a port for chemotherapy or a central venous catheter, and it is confirmed as the source of the sepsis, There is a strong recommendation to physically remove it as soon as new vascular access is established.
Right.
Because you can't just keep scooping water out of a sinking boat, right? You have to plug the hole where the water is coming in.
Perfectly said. The physical factory producing the bacteria must be removed from the body entirely.
Okay, so the bug is identified, the antibiotics are attacking it, the source is removed, but the infection is really only half the problem. The patient's blood pressure is crashing. How do they physically keep the circulatory system online?
This is where things get really challenging.
Yeah, this brings us to what the guidelines reveal is a highly debated topic: intravenous fluids. And here is where it gets really interesting. The correct treatment actually depends entirely on where the patient physically is in the world.
This is perhaps the most vital and honestly sobering distinction in the entire 2026 update. It fully acknowledges the harsh reality of global healthcare disparities.
Right, so if a child is being treated in a healthcare system with intensive care availability, an ICU, the guidelines suggest administering 40 to 60 milliliters per kilogram of fluid in boluses.
Given in smaller 10 to 20 milliliter chunks, over the first hour.
But if that exact same child is in a hospital without intensive care availability and they do not have hypotension, meaning their blood pressure hasn't plummeted yet, there is a strong recommendation based on high certainty evidence against using fluid bolus therapy.
Yes, they just give basic maintenance fluids instead.
And just to complete the matrix here, if they don't have intensive care but their blood pressure has plummeted, so they do have hypotension, then the recommendation is to give up to 40 milliliters per kilogram in the first hour. I am genuinely struggling with this logic. The exact same biological problem. A child suffering from sepsis gets a diametrically opposed treatment just based on the equipment sitting in the hallway outside their room.
I know, it sounds bizarre at first.
Why does the lack of an ICU mean you shouldn't give a fluid bolus to a child whose blood pressure is still holding?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of the disease mechanism, it makes terrifying sense. Think of the cardiovascular system as a closed loop of plumbing.
Okay.
In severe sepsis, the massive inflammatory response causes the blood vessels to become highly permeable. They get leaky.
So the pipes are literally weeping fluid.
Yes, exactly. A fluid bolus is essentially a tidal wave of saline pushed into the circulatory system to keep the pressure up. But because the vessels are leaky, all that heavy fluid you just pumped in doesn't stay in the veins.
Oh, no.
It seeps out into the surrounding tissues. And the most dangerous place it seeps into is the microscopic air sacs of the lungs.
Wow. So the fluid meant to save their blood pressure ends up drowning them from the inside.
Precisely. If you are in a fully equipped ICU, you have advanced hemodynamic monitoring, and crucially, you have mechanical ventilators.
Right? Breathing machines.
Yeah. If that fluid backs up into the lungs and the child starts drowning, the ICU team can intubate them. They use the ventilator to force oxygen through that fluid to keep the child alive while the antibiotics work.
But if you are in a rural clinic with no ventilator,
Giving that heavy fluid bolus could cause fatal respiratory failure that you have absolutely no way to treat. The available rescue options dictate the initial medicine.
that is incredibly sobering. Geography literally dictates biology.
It really does.
And it's not just the volume of the fluid they're debating, it's the chemical makeup, too. The guidelines suggest using balanced or buffered crystalloids over 0.9% normal saline or albumin. What makes normal saline so problematic in massive quantities?
Well, normal saline contains really high levels of chloride. When you pump massive volumes of it into a patient, all that extra chloride throws off the delicate acid-base balance of the blood.
That doesn't sound good.
It's not. It can cause a condition called hyperchloremic acidosis, making the blood dangerously acidic, which in turn makes the organs fail even faster. Balanced crystalloids, like lactated ringers, have a chemical makeup that much more closely mimics the body's natural blood plasma.
If pumping them full of fluid is actually dangerous in certain settings, it makes me wonder what other standard emergency protocols might be doing more harm than good.
A lot of them, actually.
Which leads directly into another major theme of these guidelines: restraint. Often, saving a life in the ICU is about knowing exactly what not to do.
There is an incredible amount of clinical discipline required here. I mean, the human urge to just do everything possible for a dying child is overpowering.
Of course.
But the data shows us that throwing the proverbial kitchen sink at the patient often causes secondary harm.
For example, breathing support. The guidelines state clearly, do not use a sedative drug called etomidate when intubating a child with sepsis. And when it comes to oxygen, they suggest targeting a conservative range, measuring a peripheral oxygen saturation between 88 and 92%, rather than a liberal target of over 94%.
Which runs completely counter to instinct, right? The assumption is they're starving for air, give them 100% pure oxygen.
Exactly. Why is 100% oxygen bad?
Because oxygen at highly concentrated levels is actually toxic. Pushing excessive oxygen into tissues that are already damaged and inflamed creates highly reactive molecules called free radicals.
Oh, right, free radicals.
Yeah, and those free radicals literally tear through cellular structures, worsening the very organ damage you are trying to prevent.
The restraint continues with medications and vitamins, too. There is a clear stance against the routine use of vitamin C, thiamine, which is vitamin B1, acute repletion of vitamin D, and a blood product called intravenous immunoglobulin, or IVIG.
They're very explicit about avoiding those routinely.
They also warn against using levothyroxine for something called a sick euthyroid state. What exactly is a sick euthyroid state?
It's a fascinating phenomenon, actually. When a child is critically ill, their thyroid hormone levels often look abnormally low on a blood test.
But the thyroid isn't actually broken.
Right. The gland itself is fine. The body is intentionally downregulating its metabolism to conserve energy during the crisis. It is a sick state, but the thyroid is functionally euthyroid, meaning normal.
So pumping artificial thyroid hormone into that delicate equation.
It doesn't help. It just overrides the body's own evolutionary defense mechanism.
They also say do not use IV hydrocortisone, a powerful steroid, if the patient's hemodynamic stability can be restored just with fluids and vasoactive drugs.
Correct.
I have to point out how counterintuitive this all feels. When a kid is crashing, the instinct must be to throw the kitchen sink at them, like you said. Give them all the vitamins, the steroids, 100% oxygen. If there's even a 1% chance it helps, why withhold it?
Because in critical care, there is no such thing as a biologically neutral intervention. Everything has a cost.
It's like trying to fix a delicate watch by hitting it with a bigger hammer.
That's spot on. The human body in severe sepsis is locked in an unimaginably complex balancing act. The immune system is triggering massive inflammation to kill the bacteria, while simultaneously triggering anti-inflammatory signals to prevent that inflammation from destroying its own
This
organs.
is basically at war with itself.
Exactly. If you introduce massive, unproven doses of steroids, you are actively suppressing the immune system at the exact moment it needs to fight the infection.
Oh, wow. I didn't think about it like that.
And if you flood the system with mega doses of vitamins without an underlying deficiency like malnutrition, you risk disrupting cellular homeostasis. You don't hit the malfunctioning watch with the bigger hammer just to see if it fixes the gears.
Right.
You save the heavy interventions only for when the watch has completely stopped ticking.
But what happens when restraint and initial stabilization aren't enough? The child's blood pressure is still dropping. The fluids aren't working. The guidelines outline a progression of advanced technological interventions.
Yes, this is the territory of refractory shock. Standard treatments have failed, and the organs are actively shutting down.
First up are vasoactive medications. The guidelines mention drugs like catecholamines and then adding vasopressin. Can you translate those for us?
Sure. Think of the cardiovascular system again as a pump and a set of pipes. Catecholamines are adrenaline-like drugs that tell the heart muscle to pump much, much harder and faster.
Okay, the pump works harder.
Right. And vasopressin acts directly on the blood vessels, forcing those relaxed, leaky pipes to clamp down tight. Both actions artificially force the blood pressure back up to keep blood flowing to the brain and vital organs.
And the guidelines say, do not wait to establish a deep central venous line to deliver these drugs. Start those vasoactive meds via standard peripheral IVs in the arms or legs immediately.
In sepsis, time is tissue. Placing a central line into a major vein near the heart requires surgical skill and takes precious time.
Every minute you wait, the organs are suffering.
Exactly. They suffer hypoperfusion, which is a critical lack of blood flow.
To monitor if these powerful drugs are working, the guidelines advise using point-of-care ultrasound to look at the heart and lungs in real time. And they target a metric called SCVO2, aiming for greater than or equal to 70%. What exactly does SCVO2 measure?
SCVO2 stands for central venous oxygen saturation. It measures the amount of oxygen left over in the blood right before it returns to the heart.
Wait, leftover.
Yes, blood leaves the heart packed with oxygen, right? As it travels through the body, the organs consume that oxygen.
Right.
If this SCVO2 reading drops below 70%, it means the organs are so starved for oxygen or the blood is moving so slowly that they are extracting nearly every available drop. It's a huge red flag that the tissues are suffocating.
And if the tissues are suffocating and the organs start dying, we reach the extreme measures, the final rescue therapies. Like for failing kidneys, they suggest high-volume hemofiltration greater than 35 milliliters per kilogram per hour, which is an aggressive form of continuous dialysis.
Yes.
And then there is ECMO, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation.
ECMO is the absolute highest echelon of life support in modern medicine.
The guidelines suggest venovenous ECMO for refractory hypoxia, when the lungs completely fail, and ventarterial ECMO as an absolute final rescue for refractory shock, when the heart itself stops pumping effectively. How does a machine completely replace a failing heart and lungs?
It honestly sounds like science fiction, but it involves inserting massive tubes into the patient's major vessels.
Wow.
The ECMO machine physically drains the dark, deoxygenated blood out of the child's body, runs it through an artificial mechanical lung to add oxygen and remove carbon dioxide.
And then puts it back.
Yeah, it pumps that bright red oxygenated blood back into the body under continuous pressure. It literally bypasses the child's own heart and lungs, giving them time to rest and heal.
So what does this all mean? We talk so much about the dramatic ICU interventions, right? The ECMO machines, the alarms, the rapid response.
Yeah, the highly visible stuff.
But the guidelines pivot heavily at the end. They outline this crucial, often overlooked recovery phase. They suggest implementing an early, individualized rehabilitation bundle while the child is still acutely ill.
Which is so important.
And they make it a primary rule to evaluate for new, long-term sequelae after hospital discharge, and to extensively educate families on post-sepsis morbidity. How critical is that transition to long-term follow-up?
It fundamentally redefines what we consider a success in critical care. Survival isn't just about leaving the hospital with a pulse anymore.
Right, it's about the quality of life afterward.
Exactly. Sepsis is a devastating systemic injury. These children can suffer from severe physical weakness, cognitive deficits from lack of oxygen to the brain, even amputations due to restricted blood flow during shock, not to mention profound psychological trauma.
Yeah, the mental toll must be immense.
It is. The fact that educating the family and long-term rehab made it into the official international guidelines validates that the medical community realizes the battle doesn't end just because the ECMO machine is turned off.
Which brings us back to where we started today. Looking at this 2026 update, the overarching theme is crystal clear. Pediatric sepsis care today is far less about dogmatic, heavily proven rules.
Absolutely.
It's about swift, highly individualized, and surprisingly restrained interventions. You look for the cellular signs like lactate. You act within the golden hour.
Yep.
You change your entire fluid strategy based on the room you're standing in. And you actively resist using the biggest hammers unless you have absolutely no other choice.
It's a testament to the agonizing nuance of critical care. But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on the reality of the evidence we've discussed today.
Okay.
This entire deep dive highlighted that out of 61 guidelines created by the world's top experts, only 3 had high or moderate certainty of evidence. For you listening, think about what this means for the future of medicine.
That's a huge question.
As we rely more and more on AI and massive global data sets in the coming years, will we finally be able to compute our way out of the dark and fill in those insufficient evidence gaps of the human body? Or
will we discover that human biology is simply too uniquely customized from person to person for universal rules to ever perfectly apply?
wow, that really pulls the rug out, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It suggests that the muddy waters we started talking about might just be a permanent feature of human biology, no matter how advanced our technology gets.
It's definitely something to think about.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the 2026 Pediatrics Sepsis Guidelines. We hope it gave you a new perspective on the incredible high-wire balancing act that frontline medical teams perform every single day.